Hey everybody, welcome back to Electric Cafe. Today's album review is on Cabaret Voltaire's 1983 album called The Crackdown. This is the band's sixth album. Um, as many of you know, they started in the early 70s in Sheffield in UK and sort of paved the way of experimental slash industrial music, little avant-garde, kind of really just experimental electronic music. And then, as the 80s sort of hit, they started to get a little bit more into straightforward dance music, and Crackdown was kind of the big change for that. They reached some interesting highs with Red Mecca, and then their follow-up album, which was called I always forget the name of that. It was 2445. Yeah, two times 45 in 1981 and 82. But when this album hit in 1983, this kind of I wouldn't say it was a revolutionary album, but for the band it changed their direction forever. Um, they went a little bit more straightforward into dance music, but also there's a rawness and like a funk in here, and almost like if you mixed early Kraftwerk or some of the more minimal Kraftwerk with like Gang of Four or something like that. Or there's a little bit of funk in there. I mean, not a little bit of funk. There's a lot of funk in there in this particular album, surprisingly. And because you always think of Cabaret Voltaire as a pretty forward straight dance artist in the 80s, leaning on industrial, but then into house music, acid house, and then later on in the early 90s, ambient music and techno and stuff like that. And so they moved pretty well with the trends. Thanks to Richard Kirk, who sadly passed away a couple years ago, very influential to me, and then Stephen Mollinder, both of them together, through the 80s, just really did a good job of kind of some difficult trends to kind of make their own path through. Not a lot of bands could stay underground and then do a good job of doing popular dance music and then sort of go off into still more underground music. And Cabaret Voltaire was one of the only ones who could probably do that, and they did a great job of that. And in my opinion, they kind of solidified themselves as one of the probably one of the most important underground electronic artists of the 80s, and you could say of their career through the early 90s, from the middle 70s. This is their sixth album. This is their second time on the channel. I reviewed their 1985 album called Covenant, Arm of the Lord, and I give that one a 61 out of 100. It's a good album for sure, but it's got a little bit of opportunities. Is the album after this? This kind of set them up for some popularity, and when the next album hit, Microphonies, it kind of catapulted them into the realm of Kraftwerk and Art of Noise and some of the more popular dance acts in like 1984, maybe even like Telex on the underground as well. But as far as some of the earlier, before like 84 electronic artists, but you can hear a really strong. You can see where Nitzareb, for example, kind of got their sound from. I mean, they had to have been listening to a lot of Cabaret Voltaire, and maybe it's a coincidence that Nitzareb's, uh, Douglas McCarthy, the vocalist, but he sounds a lot like, um, Cabaret Voltaire, and I don't think it's a full on coincidence, but it certainly works for Douglas's his range and his voice and his more baritone voice. But you can really see the difference between this album. I mean, not really different, the similarities between this album and Nitzareb. Nitzareb just kind of took it to another industrial level, but you can see a lot of the early sound is here for like in Nitz Rev, for example. So I think that's kind of what helps them tie to industrial, because I don't think necessarily in 1983 they were trying to be industrial. Uh, I just think Cabaret Voltaire was a little different to be put into dance music and a little bit different to be put into synth pop or new wave. So they kind of and it makes sense because the early stuff was more experimental and maybe a little bit grating and again experimental, but just all kind of all kinds of different. Like Red Mecca is a perfect example. It's almost hard to explain. Red Mecca almost reminds me of Eno's and David Byrne's Life in the Ghost. Is it Ghost in the Life? Life of a Ghost, or whatever that experimental album was. That kind of reminds me of like Red Mecca. And it's very of the time, like 80, 81, 82. It's kind of that time of experimentation in a lot of industrial artists and sort of coming over to, sort of make some more dancey music. And when Microphonius launched them to almost worldwide success, it kind of misdirected them a little bit, and that's maybe towards feeling like they had to do a little bit more dance music, and I think to some degree, Covenant, Arm of the Lords, and Code, their 1987 album, sort of was probably affected a little bit because they were trying to make dance hits and maybe a little bit more mainstream. And so those two albums kind of suffered a little bit, in my opinion, when you compare those to Microphonies or Crackdown. But the great thing about Cabaret Voltaire is if you listen to all the albums, you still only have uncovered about half of their career, and maybe even less than half of their career, because there's just so much to explore when it comes to their compilations, their singles, and then you take into account Richard Kirk's solo career, which I'm a big fan of, with Sandoz and Electric Eye, and uh, I'm blanking on another name. Of course, he had the big hit with I always forget the name. I don't want to miss it. So also the big hit he had with Sweet Exorcist in the rave music. So Kirk was just he was, in my opinion, just one of the best artists that ever transitioned from industrial or dance music and kind of gravitated towards electronic and rave music. Probably only rivaled by Genesis P. Orridge from Psychic TV, in my opinion, and maybe a Clock DVA did a little bit, but not to the extent that, as far as the amount of material and the amount of great material when it comes to Richard Kirk's career. And so the Covenant album that I rated 61 it's a good album, but it's got some flaws as far as like being a little bit too more popular. Crackdown I knew was going to be a better album. Um, when I first heard it, it was always kind of like the change for the band. I first got into Cabaret Voltaire probably around 1987. And it's funny because if you guys know them well or know the movie Ferris Bueller really well, in the bedroom there's Matthew Broderick has quite a few electronic artist posters. Certainly inspired by John Hughes movies and his love for putting new wave and synth pop into his movies. And if you see on the walls, it has a cover. There's a cover of Microphonies by Cabaret Voltaire on his bedroom wall, and it's right next to Simple Minds, and there's Roxy Music, and um, I'm blanking on one other name. Um, Might be a Depeche Mode one in that too. Although I know Depeche Mode's in Weird Science. Depeche Mode and Human League's Dare or Hysteria, I think, and then Depeche Mode's Some Great War, I think, is on the cover of that of their bedroom wall. But I'm missing on one. It's Roxy Music, Simple Minds, Cabaret Voltaire, and there might be another one. It might be English Beat or somebody else. I'm forgetting who's also on that wall. But that's where I first heard of Cabaret Voltaire, was from that movie. And I looked on the wall and I was like, shoot, if I know Roxy Music and I know Simple Minds and then the other artist I can't remember, let me check out Cabaret Voltaire. And I checked out Cabaret Voltaire, and I got yeah, Code, at the time, which was 1987, and I liked it a lot, obviously, and right away I went through getting all their early albums, everything from the YMCA album. I always call it the YMCA album. Is it YCMA or YMCA? It's the all white one. It's the live album. And then I got the Yashar single, and Crackdown, and Microphonies, and Covenant, and then all the way up through the compilations and some of the acid house music, and then all the way through the ambient music and the rave music of the early '90s with Electronic Eye. So I've always been a big fan of Cabaret Voltaire, and if you know the albums, there's still so much to explore when you look at the EPs and the compilations. And just while I have it here, I wanted to throw out this compilation. If you like basically what this compilation did with the Western Reworks 1992, basically took a lot of their early singles and sort of updated them. And so there's 4 songs from this album that were updated, including Talking Time, 2424, Crackdown, the title track, and Just Fascination. And then they also went to the Gasoline EP. I think it's Gasoline EP. It's called. Took Sleepwalking, Kino, Ghost Talk. There's also I Want You on You, I Want You on Here. And then one of their all-time best tracks, I feel like, and I Want You. And there's a great remix on here. The 808 Heaven remix is fantastic on here. But this is kind of a nice updated version of this. So that's the great thing about Cabaret Voltaire, is there's so much music to find, and then there's so much different versions to explore, and they did a good job of having a lot of remixes on their albums as well. So yeah, let's get into reviewing this album real quick. I'll try to skim through this kind of quickly. When I think of the overall real quick, there's just some classic tracks on here for sure. Just Fascination and Crackdown. But there's also some good secondary tracks. 2424, Talking Time, and Animation. Those 5 are my 5 favorite on the albums. But I really enjoy the instrumental Haiti at the end of the album. That's a really strong instrumental. I wish it went on a little bit longer. If you guys know Flood engineered this. So back in his early career, before he started producing and working with Mute Records and stuff like that, he helped engineer this album. So I mean, I'm a big fan of Flood, as you may know. It seems like anytime we talk about any kind of Mute artist or any kind of remix of their artist or producing, I'll mention Flood's name when it comes to Erasure, Nitzareb, Recoil, Depeche Mode, and even Cabaret Voltaire. Yeah, just fantastic engineer and producer. A studio guru, if there was ever one. I really like the rawness and the drum programming of this album, but there's still a lot of bass in here, drumming, keyboard, some guitar in here, some sampling, some sound effects. So it's even though it seems like an electronic album, it's kind of really um, it's almost like kind of too slow sometimes for dance music. It almost kind of leans it into like a early electro funk or sort of yeah, I mean sort of electro funk. It's got a lot of rawness to the sound on here. The first track, 2424, love the groove on it. 3.25 stars. In the Shadows, kind of has a little bit of an Eastern vibe to it. 2.5 stars, and that's tied with Haiti for the lowest. Actually, there's one track that's a little lower than that. Number 7, Why Kill Time. That's my least favorite track, and it's 2.25 stars, so it's a pretty strong album. Talking Time, 3.25 stars. Animation is a little bit faster on this one, not so minimal. 3.5 stars, nice change of pace. One of my favorites on the album. Over and Over, 2.75 stars. It almost has like a Joy Division sound to it in this album, and that's what's cool too. Is if you like Gang of Four and you like Joy Division, if you took Joy Division a little bit and it took some of the funk out of Gang of Four and put them on a dance track, you would have this album. Like it sounds very kind of in the wheelhouse of like, like could be like Isolation by Joy Division, or one of the kind of more raw beats. This one just adds a little bit of funk in there, and it kind of sounds like Joy Division and early Gang of Four for me. It's a very very cool sounding album. Very raw though. Don't expect some big production on here. It's very minimal. Over and Out, 2.75. Just Fascination, obviously a single from the album. Was remixed later. And I do have the vinyl. I do have quite an extensive Cabaret Voltaire record collection, and related, just especially because of Rich Kirk. In fact, I have a couple of Richard Kirk's albums right here, including his box set and the Electronic Eye box set and the other album, and which I was actually thinking about reissuing on my own label, but unfortunately he passed away, and so I'd have to dig around to see who. But I'm sure there's a bunch of people clamoring to release his Sandos work and his work on Entone Records, and just again his electronic eye stuff, and just Cabaret Voltaire in general. I would imagine a lot of people are clamoring over reissuing his work. It just needs to be set up for the next generation to enjoy. Um, but yeah, I do have Just Fascinations 2002. 2002 they sort of remixed the track and made some dub versioning. Francis Kevorkian remixed it, and he also on the B side took Sex, Money, and Freaks as well and remixed that as well. It's a really strong EP. So if you're a fan of Just Fascination, look for that 12-inch. It came out in 2001, I believe, on trying to think of what record label it came on. The font is like right in my the font is like right in my memory, but I can't recall what label it's from. It's funny, like if you guys grew up in the 80s and 90s like I did, and how you found music. I could do a whole episode on how to find music, but I really think like the way we used to find music in the 80s and 90s before the internet was I think so unique, because it might vary by music digger. Of course, you could just go into a record store and dig around, but that's not always going to help you. It's just digging around. You can't listen to it, right? You have to have names. You have to know producers, record labels, but even down to or remixers or what have you, or even cities and countries during a certain time. If you see 1985 and you're like Sweden, for example, and you're like dub, you're like, oh, that's interesting. I'm gonna check that out. Who in Sweden was doing dub music in 1985? That's just an example, but you know what I mean. Like, so if you knew the genres and you knew the countries and the times and stuff like that, you could find what you really were looking for, or what you hoped to look for, and find some good surprises just by knowing labels and times and countries and remixers and names and stuff like that. But also, the reason why I'm telling you this is because I always felt like I found really good music by the art, and then that's kind of obvious, but also by the font of music. As digital art was becoming more and more popular through the 80s, like, and there's a lot of similarities between the graphic art between people, but also there was an intention there in labels looking all the same. Factory was a perfect example. They kind of set the bar for all the factory records to kind of look similar. 4AD was another one, right? So, if you knew, like I'm thinking in my head, Just Fascination. I'm thinking about the font on there, and I almost want to say it was on Instinct Records, but I don't think it was. But it kind of had that bubble font that Taylor Dupree used to do from Instinct Records, if you know the label. Well, he used to do a lot of bubble lettering and artwork and stuff like that. And he did all the Instinct. Perfect example is early Moby stuff. If you know Moby's first record or his album called Ambient, that has kind of the bubble art that I'm talking about. So if you look at that Taylor Dupree did the artwork, and he did all Instinct Records and all their sub labels. And so I want to say that was on Instinct Records, but I could be wrong, especially because it's in the 2001. But it could be. I don't know. It'd be interesting. It's funny when I can't think exactly of something. It really bothers me because I try to be very thorough when I do reviews, and but mostly it's off the top of my head. I don't go to Wikipedia's page when I do reviews and do like an overview. Unless I don't really know the album, I might look up a little bit, but for the most part, I just try to go off the top of my head and kind of talk about my experience with the band and the album, and hopefully that's kind of a better angle than just reading, a Wikipedia page. This album went to number 4 in the UK, and it was produced by the, you know what I mean, like I don't know, that I can do that on some things. Like I do like speaking about like some successes and sales and stuff like that, or where it hit the charts and stuff like that, or where it was popular in. But generally, I'd rather talk about the actual music itself than the success that it had. Um, but yeah, Just Fascination is one of their classic songs, and this particular version of Just Fascination, because I'm really used to this version as well, because I used to play this version a lot, because it's more danceable. It's kind of updated a little bit, but then also the version that I was talking about, and then I want to say there's a couple other versions in there, especially from their 12-inch record that originally came on. So this particular version of Just Fascination, the album version, it sounds a lot like listening to early Kraftwerk. So if you like early Kraftwerk, you're really going to enjoy this album. If you like Telex, if you like Art of Noise, you're really going to enjoy this album if you don't know it. Um, so yeah, 3.5 stars for Just Fascination. My least favorite, least liked song on here is Will Kill Time. Why kill time when you can kill yourself? Interesting title. Um, More bass on here. It's funkier, some good guitar work. It's a solid track, 2.25 stars, but it's my least liked. Haiti, the instrumental, track number 8, is really cool. It has a nice industrial raw sound to it. Just some really cool sounds in here. I wish it was a little bit longer and went on a little bit, evolved just a little bit longer. It's a little bit around 3.5 minutes track, so it's not short by any means, but for an ambient sort of instrumental, I kind of wish it went on a little bit longer. But it's a good track. I got 2.5 stars. And then lastly, the title track is my favorite on the album. 3.75 stars for Crackdown. This version is really cool because, again, it got remixed on here, for example, on the EP extended versions, etc. Different live versions that you can hear, throughout the internet, YouTube. But this particular album version is a little bit more dramatic and raw. It's a little bit more minimal. It kind of adds some eerie keyboards, which is really cool, which the later versions don't. Bass line's really cool. It has these guitar parts, really cool. The drumming's really nice. It's less dancey, but it's more like minimal raw electronic funk. Like that's all you can say is just electronic funk. The opportunities for this album, some songs do sound sort of the same. I mean, you kind of run into that a little bit. 24/24, Talking Time, Animation in the Shadows, over and over. The first 4 or 5 songs, they do kind of have roughly the same beat and tempo for the most part, but don't let that put you off from listening to the album, because it's just my opinion that there's a little bit of songs that sort of sound the same a little bit, but don't. But you know what I mean, like a little bit with the tempo and sort of the beat. What else? The cool thing about this album, or it could be an opportunity for some, lyrically and performance-wise, this is kind of the start of him sort of doing this, doing his vocals like this, and which kind of carried on for the next few years. But it kind of became more powerful, maybe a little bit more straightforward, a little bit more because also the songs got a little bit faster and maybe a little bit more dancey. But I think he became a little bit more confident as as the years kind of go through on the middle A's. So you get a little bit of rawness, which is really cool, and it's a little bit more. I think I think a little bit more pleasing to me than maybe some of the later stuff. Um, in his voice, anyway, it's just kind of there's a little bit more. I wouldn't say more creepiness or anything like that, but just a little bit more. I would say even avant garde, like I don't know, just a little bit more raw vocals in here, you know. But the good on here, a lot of good tracks. It divides, adds up to 27 and a quarter stars divided by 9 songs, so it's a little bit over 3.02 in my scoring. So where Covenant was a 61 out of 100, I give the Crackdown a 72 out of 100. I think it's a very good album. Strong album. Definitely one of those albums that I think if you were to choose a Cabaret Voltaire album, it would probably be this one or Microphonies. Um, or if you want, get this. This is really good too. Of their 80s albums, I'm a big fan of their 90s work. I really love their 90s work because it adds more ambient and techno and stuff like this. But and I really like industrial too, so that, I like this almost as much. But, this is kind of the raw origins. The raw origins of the band and sort of their change of becoming an experimental band sort of into a little bit more pop dance. This kind of Crackdown kind of started that sort of their peak period of the next 4 or 5 years, and then they got into acid house again, and then rave music and ambient and techno and stuff like that, and house music as well. Just all over the place, and did a great job of it. But yeah, that's my overall thoughts on Crackdown from 1983 by Cabaret Voltaire. 72 out of 100. Really strong album. I'd be curious to know your favorites on this album and what your thoughts are on this album. All right, thanks so much.